for it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe head back into the belief part of the quarterback
Yeah.
position, and then we'll go from there.
So anyway, there's a window of adaptation. I think the young adolescent boys and girls face it. Girls, develop about 2 years faster than males do, so theirs happens faster. So there's a big reason why you can't just pick up a football and throw with your left hand the same way you can with your right hand. And essentially, what happens is the humerus actually starts to twist and change. And so you lose internal rotation and you gain external rotation. The shoulder capsule changes position essentially. So there's an actual adaptation that happens in the shoulder joint. And that's really one of the main factors. So if a kid's trying to play quarterback and they're very pushy or they don't have a lot of layback, there's a good chance that's never going to happen. Hence why some people can throw and others can't. So throwing early on, and this isn't a statement to go out there with your 4-year-old and make them throw ball pens for 5 hours, which already happens anyway. But so natural thrower, there's some like fluidity and natural things you want to see from them. And if they can't throw, then it doesn't matter. I mean, in high school, I guess, depending on the offense you run, it just makes it very difficult to, always face an 8-man box if you don't have a guy that can throw.
Yeah.
So throwing is obviously the number one trait we're looking for. And then hopefully they've got some of the other traits. I think toughness is probably one of the things that I look for. No one wants a quarterback that's soft, I guess, if you can say that. But I don't want, you want someone that's willing to kind of put it all in line, lead by example first. They don't have to be a rah-rah guy. I think being their own type of leader is important. And then understanding when to get on, teammates and not to, when to encourage, when to lift up, when to bring it back. Someone that's kind of a even-keeled person, I think, is generally speaking, works quite well. There's also a great saying from Brian Billick years ago. I'll mess it up. It's like you can't win with a quarterback that does everything you say and nothing you say. So you want someone that sometimes ignores you and does something amazing. And then other times like, hey man, I need you to do this way, and then they can follow instructions. So I think there's a little element there of what we look for. So philosophically, I think that's a good way to describe the quarterback that I think will have most success.
Yeah, I like that. Now, going from that, I know a lot of guys want to know, like, how do you start? So let's say you're taking, I don't know, a freshman at the high school, since you're a high school football coach now.
Yeah.
When you work technique, maybe you're like starting with like the throw or the base. Like, what do you teach your cues? Do you have like cues that you're looking at? Like, I want to see your base be outside the shoulders. I want to see like a pre-pass triangle.
Sure.
That some of the guys teach with the R4. Like, what do you look for in your base, and like how do you coach that through your indie drills? Because I've struggled with that. Like, I want a certain throwing motion, but I don't want them to be robotic. But they've got to hit the
100%.
checkpoints in the throw, if that makes sense. So,
could
you maybe go over that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I think there's a little bit of a balancing act here. So ideally speaking, you want your quarterbacks to, when you're rolling into the fall, you don't want to be focusing on mechanics. The position of quarterback is won during the off season.
Yes.
So I think there's, this is kind of a cop-out answer, but honestly, at this point in football and the access to trainers and information out there, hopefully the guy you're getting during the summer going into the fall, from a young quarterback standpoint, has had some kind of access to coaching or some information out there, right?
Right.
And so I think that if you're having to build a quarterback, and that might be the case. A lot of people are in situations where they have to actually make one.
Yeah.
So, hopefully they've done work previously to kind of come in with a foundation. That being said, I think there's some very simplistic things. I've thought about this question a lot because it's a common question.
Right.
And there's always the risk of actually overloading coaches and players with too much information to try and get the perfect throw and the perfect mechanics.
Right.
So I try to think of like, what's the right amount of information to help coaches coach the position. So base and ball carriage, and we call it stop and start coaching, right? So what do they look like before they throw? What do they look like after the throw?
Okay.
those two things, understanding those two things, I think can help, um, you know, easily deliver feedback where the athlete can then apply that on the next rep. So specifically, we look at the start of the throw. We want to relax centrally located pre-pass position. There's absolutely no advantage to having the ball up past your sternum, your collarbone area,
Okay.
a high. Yeah, they'll thought is that if you get it up high, you're going to get out quicker.
Right.
And so the problem with that is you're changing sequencing. You're creating a situation of we have like a slack tension relationship, right? So the further you can just feel it, the further your hands go up, the more tension is in your shoulders.
Yes.
And if you ever tried to, back in the good old days when you had to drive a stick shift car and you got your e-brake on, bringing your hands up like this is like driving with the e-brake on. Like it's tension that's working against the throw. So you want your muscles to be in an active but not firm position. So you want to be able to have good pec to pec movement. You want to think of the pre-pass position more of a suggestion rather than like a very specific location. Because if you watch football, every single movement is going to have some level of like, movement with the ball out, in, down, around, all different spots. And from any moment you want to trigger that into the throw.
Right.
So we actually work in some drill work, we'll work, different pre-pass positions and to be able to find that athlete's throw from any pre-pass position, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So relaxed elbows, firm wrists, right? So not overcocked, not overcurled. The best way to look at that is where the athlete's fingers are in relationship to the football. So if the fingers are really far apart, it means their wrists are probably going to be overextended. So they should be relatively close together when they're holding the football, somewhat nose down. It could be nose out a little bit, like Drew Brees is kind of a little bit more of the old school triangle approach, but more of a relaxed, comfortable position. And I know coaches are scared of the word comfortable, but that's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
And then from the base standpoint, the general rule of thumb is that the longer the feet are, the wider the feet are apart, the harder it is for the hips to turn, right? So there's a point of like diminishing returns with a wide base. So Drew Brees famously had a wide base, but if you look at the NFL, no one else really had a base that wide ever, right? And so it's a mistake to go, well, that guy is the greatest of all time, so let's do everything the way he did. Well, no, like if we're talking about being elite as a thrower, there's plenty of guys that might not be as good as Drew Brees, but might be better throwers, right? And so if we're going to help people be better throwers, we got to look at the best throwers. So generally speaking, the base is in somewhere, where the hips and the heels are aligned in some capacity, right? Really because you want to be able to put yourself in a position in the drop on movement where you can fire the back hip, you can pull the front hip, you can create great hip rotation. So the simplest answer is I always talk about hips inside heels and not too far outside of that. I think that's a really good place to start with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a nice shin angle. You can push front to back. You don't want to get too reachy on the end of the drop where the foot goes too far away from the hip and you get the big hitch.
Yeah.
Right, but somewhere where the hips and the heels can stay aligned somewhat, and then we can get a good quick front foot strike on to start the throw. And then I think one of the other good coaching cues that's helped me a lot. Again, football coaches, and again, you have to excuse my pettiness in the industry and stuff, but I just at this point I've done trying to like dance around and make people feel good about the way that they coach things, regardless of how much they get paid or where they coach for. I think that the old stand tall and bend your knees and stand tall that's not good coaching. Language is powerful, right? And so you would never tell someone squatting 500 pounds you need to bend your knees, right? We always talk about the hips, and so we want the hips to be loaded in the ground, right? And so chest over toes, low hips is a really good coaching cue pre-throw. Not squatted to the ground, but just that little point where you catch your weight.
Right.
You can feel it, where like if you put a bunch of weight on your back, you could hold it there for quite some time. It's not too low where you're squatty, but you're engaging the front and the back of the leg, the core and the lower back. Everything's like locked in. So the kind of that nice little chest over toes position, I think, is really important, where the heels can be in the ground, the balls of the feet can be in the ground, and we can be in an explosive yet powerful position. And then so that starting position, if we can start there, then we want to analyze how the quarterback finishes, right? And so there's some things I think, back foot down on the ground, right? And so
Right.
why do we want to teach the back foot down on the ground? Again, people get carried away with stuff, and it's only the back foot down. It's got to be back. No, it doesn't. The data says the motion capture data says it does not. But in theory, having your back toe down through the throw just helps you keep level hips. And if your hips are level, then it's easier to keep your spine angle neutral. And if it's easy to keep your spine angle neutral, then it's easier to keep your shoulders neutral. And then the arm angle can be naturally attached to all of those. We don't have those leaning, pulling throwers,
Right.
right? So that's a great way to coach back toe down through release, famously from Tom House, right?
Yep.
100% correct. But understand why we're teaching it. The more level we can be through the hips and the lower body, the more consistent we can be as a thrower. We want to minimize the amount of variables that are happening during the throw. So if we got a lot of lean and a lot of pull, then the athlete's gonna have to compensate with other things. And I think being in that position where the toe is down, we have a great front leg, where it's planted heavily. We don't want to have a soft front knee, meaning the knee bends during the throw. And I'm not saying be locked out either, but I think the for right-handed throw, your left ass cheek should finish somewhere behind your left heel in a position where you've got a strong quad, your hamstrings engaged. And then, I feel like the back foot in theory should finish somewhere behind the front foot if we have good hip rotation, early
Yeah.
hip rotation, right? Coaching the foot to come around, one of the old school things I think has finally died, although I'm sure there's some guys out there still coaching it. But that means your hips are in rotation too long if that back foot keeps coming around, right? And so the thing about throwing is famously said, ground force into rotational force. And then the third part being the deceleration phase of the throw, whereas we want to accelerate in that rotational manner as fast as we can, but we want to have that suddenness in the stop, right? So a good front leg, back toe down, that anchored position gives us that stop, which creates that whip-like feeling. So I just threw a lot of information there, but start,
No, good.
finish, I think it's a good way to look at it. And then the easiest thing I think that coaches can coach is the lead arm, right? Slightly back as we start the release, so hand behind sternum. If you have a problem with that, I'd love to hear an explanation why. But the reason we coach it is because it helps keep the front shoulder closed. So it's
Yep.
actually less about the hand, it's more about the front shoulder. And keeping the front shoulder closed is important because it lets the hips get into rotation,
Right.
right? So if your shoulder's opening, then the relative rotation of the hips and the shoulders is not the same, right? So we get this nice little flash from the shoulder, which is really, if we think about it for cues, it's very easy to think about just that nice tap back. And that's why you see a lot of quarterbacks tap the ball
Yeah.
pre-release.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it's to help create that dissociation between the shoulders and the hips, right? And so then the lead arm's going to go. We don't want it to fly open and drop out and come around. We want it to come into a position of stabilization, right? Essentially, you want to finish somewhere in the center line of the body. You don't want the hand outside. If your
Right.
offhand is outside of the frame of the body, that's a really easy thing to coach and cue, right?
Yeah.
We don't want that big chest spread, pull around technique. We want to be patient with the front side, and then aggressive with the lower body. I think that's probably the easiest things. Look at the start, look at the finish. Try not to mess with the middle. The higher the elbow is, the harder it is to passively lay your arm back, right? So everyone they used to talk about the high elbow stuff.
Yep.
And that has its place in certain throws, but from a standard way to approach the throw to create velocity is a byproduct of the hips firing, front foot strike, and passive layback, right? Like how far, if you look at pitches of Patrick Mahomes, his arm, like I can't even
Yeah.
get it. It's like all the
Yep.
way laid back, right? So that's like an elastic band that's going to fire. And so if your elbow's up higher, you can't lay your arm back as far, right? So what ends up happening is great throwers naturally fall somewhere between the chin and the shoulder line in terms of where the elbow comes through in the throw. And that creates a really good, in baseball, we talk about an arm spiral, right? And the arm spiral is the action of the arm coming through passive layback into the release. And so allowing your cue to have somewhere probably in that range, right? I think is super important. So I tend to stay away from saying, you'll see some stuff with the elbows low and they get under the ball and it flies too high.
Right.
But yeah, I think somewhere in that neighborhood, and then just let the rest kind of fall where it may. A lot of times for young quarterbacks, it's just getting reps throwing. They don't throw enough.
Yeah.
And so, but I think generally speaking, the start and stop, base and ball carriage, you can get a lot accomplished by just taking that approach.
Yeah, and I've always heard that like the throw can be referred to like taking a rubber band back and then letting
Yes,
it go and kind of stopping at a point. And
absolutely.
I like that analogy because I think it clicks with high school kids. And I've always used that analogy, and I think that's one of the good ones out there. But I've always struggled with like the front arm and being able to keep it relatively with the body. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, I know you coach kids through the cues. Like, do you have any
yeah,
drill that you do that
yeah,
to help attach the
absolutely.
front arm to the
So
body?
usually it's a level of awareness that they're just not aware of what their front arm is doing, right?
Yeah.
And so I think I have a good perspective in on coaching because I've coached everything wrong. So I've done it all the wrong ways. Um, and I think once an athlete has an awareness of the front arm, it makes it easier. So one of the things that I've learned this past couple of years, Dr. Tom Gormelli, who's the head strength and performance coach at Torque Sports Performance, located here in the Jacksonville, Florida area. I think he's one of the highly regarded, like top throwing coaches nationally, in terms of developing a unbelievable foundation and programming athletes to help them really maximize their skill sets. Um, and so one of the things I learned from him is a great way to teach a lot of these mechanics. And this is something that like I knew but didn't know that I knew and had to just like give it and go, oh my gosh, I gotta pay more attention to this. Um, and so a better way to pattern like the lead arm and is to do it without a football at first, honestly.
Yeah.
Right. And so the way that we get a lot of our athletes better mechanically in certain areas is we put them against the wall and we give them these little plyo balls that they can smash on the wall. The football gives you feedback sometimes that you don't need. When you're trying to work on mechanics, right? Because once you throw a bad ball and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing that again. It's like,
Right.
no, actually, we need to work through that.
Yeah.
And so if you have, and it doesn't have to, it could be like a tennis ball or whatever the case is, but we're just working. We don't want the elbow to pull into the body. We
Right.
don't want the elbow to pull around the body, right? If I look at my thrower from the back, okay, we'll have a little bit of counter rotation for some athletes. Some athletes will just be perfectly still. It doesn't always have to be in. We don't want it to be out. The elbow should be inside the shoulder at the beginning of the throw. It might be lower, might be higher. We don't want this inversion,
Yeah.
right? And we don't want it pinned to the body, right? So it's somewhere in between. So it's slightly back, and then just think of it. And House uses a great analogy. It's like take a bite out of a burger, but essentially that's what we're doing, right? We don't want to. It's in baseball. It's we want to work to the glove hand.
Yeah.
Don't work the glove hand to you. And so once they can learn not to pull or rip or pin or swing the front arm, you can get 100 reps doing that on a wall without throwing a football ever, right?
Yeah.
And so they just have to feel it, and it's a feeling of like the left shoulder stopping and working into your pecs almost squeezing together. This becomes the axis of rotation, the left side on the throw. You'll see Tom Brady is very extreme with his, where he wants to tap his right shoulder at the end of the throw.
Right.
We don't need to look like that. I mean,
Yeah.
Rodgers is underneath, right? He's an underneath throw, which is very, very rare. We have, one out of every like 200 kids I see that can actually keep their hand underneath the arm when they throw. But I think get on a wall with something that isn't a football and pattern it in that movement where they can hold it off the body, they can stabilize it. And it feels a little awkward at first, but you just got to kind of push them through that part.
That's really good stuff. I'm definitely going to take that because I've got a 4-year-old and I'm obviously not going to have him throw bullpens or put him in three
Right.
step drops, but like I'm trying to build a base with him. And a lot of this stuff I'm trying to coach him through. And I definitely think the younger they are, I mean, it's the better it is. But
I
a lot
think
of that stuff is
especially
really
with,
good stuff.
yeah, and with the younger athletes. So like, I've got 3 boys and 1 girl, and they're all in some version. One's my daughter's a volleyball player. My 2 younger boys will be, they play everything: basketball, volleyball,
Yep.
football.
Right.
I think with younger athletes, especially early on, those younger ages, honestly, more just throwing stuff, right? Because there's
Yep.
natural stages of throwing that kids go through. They'll be wrong foot forward, they'll be facing, right? And so
Yep.
it's just like there's neurological issues that happen, I think, when people skip the crawling phase,
Mm-hmm.
right? So early on with, with athletes, we don't want to skip phases. You want to kind of let them find their own pattern and
Right.
pathway, and they'll be undisciplined on the front side at a certain
Oh,
point.
definitely.
But when they get to an age where they're ready to be coached, and that might not be till they're 11, that might not be till they're 9. It just
Right.
depends. People
Yep.
chronologically and biologically are different. How that works out, meaning that someone could be 10 years old physically, mentally they might be 12 years old, or they could be 12 years old mentally, and 14-year-olds physically. So it
Right.
changes with certain athletes. But there's a point where you'll be able to cue some things. Most issues in throwers are coached in from freaking, Coach Jimmy over there, and then, but mom and dad, man, trying to get after it, right? It's
Yeah.
like, just early on, just throw stuff at
Yep.
stuff.
And
And
that
that's
reminds me, I
it.
remember, I think it was a year or two ago, I saw you put on social media, like for younger kids to let them throw anything. So
Yes.
I took that advice to heart. And so my
Yeah.
4-year-old, he was 2 at the time, but I told him to throw everything. And
Just throw
my
stuff. Yeah.
wife obviously hated it, but
Yeah.
I'm telling you, that development just from that was huge. Like half
Yeah.
filled water bottles. I mean, different types of objects. That was the best piece of advice I've gotten for sure.
That's good. Keep rolling with that, and there'll be a point where they'll be like, "Okay, I'm ready for it," and then that's where you move down those
Yeah.
those areas. Yeah.
Now moving on to like more of the like indie work and like group work. I know I put on social
Yeah.
media like what are the best drills or even like your indie period where you're getting them warmed up. Like what are the
Yeah.
best drills for like game development? And I know that's the
Oh, I
question
love
everybody
this.
wants to answer and wants to know.
Yeah.
But
Everyone wants drills.
right,
I've been
right.
doing
And
this
and
15
I know
years.
that's probably
Drills.
not gonna be the answer, but like
Yeah.
I had a hard time with that as a coach as well. I didn't want to overcoach. I didn't want to coach them into
Yeah.
being robots, but I also didn't want to
You
let
got to
them
do
go
something,
and just
right?
let them be
Yeah.
themselves. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of where I'm
Um.
going to go with it.
No, it's great. I know this is a great discussion. I love this question. And that's why I think I responded. It was like, this is the hardest question in the world.
Yeah.
Um. Because there's an element where I think that, again, our approach to maybe coaching it is that at the core of it, like, indie time is not really worth doing a whole lot. Um,
I agree with that
it's
100%.
it's really not,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, okay, but I do indie time. I have everyday drills in some capacity, um, and there is value in good drills, but what's the point of a drill? Like, what do we want to gain from the drill? And I
Yep.
think the way that we look at it as coaches, there's a whole community online that like defend drills because Clemson did it. Well, if you look at coaching as a whole, and there's two problems here. One is high school, college, pro, doesn't matter. They don't have time to coach technical movements well. They
Yep.
don't,
Right.
because the game is schematically driven.
Yep.
And so if you're spending all your time teaching your kid how to move with their back foot first, which is incorrect, um, because sometimes it's back foot first and sometimes it's front foot first,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes the foot goes the opposite direction. But if you're having to spend 15 minutes, doing shuffle drills to like get better at pocket movement, I don't, and because so and so at XYZ college does it, man. If you look at what ends up happening is that quarterbacks come out of college and they have to change and fix and tweak things, right? Well, in theory, if there was a great drill, everyone would just do it, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
um, there's things I think that are helpful, and I think that there's things that I think that are generally a waste of time. So I think overvaluing indie time is a mistake, right? And now I think there is great value in indie time for certain things. Number one, your warm up should pattern great movements in your throw from a technical standpoint, period, right? So famously, Tom House would say, like, don't throw to warm up to throw, right? Which makes a ton of sense to me. I love that concept, right? And so we have a warm up that we do where we do some things with some bands, some weighted balls, that we're like stimulating great movements,
Yeah.
and those are sometimes individualized to certain athletes, right? So if and the lucky thing I have is I have access to data, I have access to motion capture technology, so I can cheat. But I don't know if an athlete really suffers, they're not very good at separating their hips and their shoulders, and they need drills in their warm up that help them separate their hips and their shoulders, right? If there's an athlete that needs to continually work on their layback, then we want to make sure we're, doing some things in the warm up to help them work on their layback, right? And so there's certain drills that we'll use in the warm up, the pre-throwing routine, that I think are really, really important from a technical standpoint. So once we move into indie time, arm care, so I say post arm care, like we're in indie time, we're actually putting a football in the hand, then I want that to be representative of the game at that point, right? Now I'm going to give them mechanical cues as they're throwing early on, but by the time we get to 7-on-7 or whatever drill we're doing, the group period we're doing, I'm not, very rarely I'm going to say stuff like, "Hey, that was a front side issue," Okay, I want them focused on the game at that
Yeah.
point.
Makes sense.
So the couple things that I think that are helpful that from a drill standpoint is like, don't overcomplicate things, right? Do you want a technical advantage? Do you want a technical progression from this drill, or do you want a tactical progression from this drill? Meaning, do you want it to help gameplay, or do you want it to help their fundamentals? So a couple things that coaches don't do enough of early on, right? We do a thing, and I stole this from Bobby Stroop, who works with Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
Fantastic mind in terms of movement training and just thinking about rotational athletes in a different way. He calls them locomotion throws, and basically it's this concept of, you're jogging, you're throwing across your body, you're keeping your movement going, you're backpedaling, you're shuffling. And it's these off-angled throws that we do early on, right? When you're rolling to your right as a right-handed quarterback, the arm speed you have to create naturally to get the ball out is better than you ever will have to do on any other throw. When you're rolling to your left, the amount of separation for your hips and your shoulders you have to create is more than you'll ever have to do. So early on, I like my quarterbacks to have some kind of movement as they're warming up. And then we do a lot of stuff, I call it wrong feet, right shoulders. And so you used the analogy before of like throwing being like pulling an elastic band back and letting it go, which is an absolutely amazing and beautiful analogy. I'm like an analogy fan, right? But I want you to think of this from a standpoint of how, rotational sports work, right? So you can pull that up, think of a slingshot. I can pull the back of the slingshot back, let it go. I can actually pull the front of the slingshot away and let it go. I can pull them both apart at the same time and let it go. And I think it was Dr. Greg Rose from TPU that used that analogy early on. I think the great thing about that is that we can create hip rotation with negative shoulder rotation. So anytime I can rotate my shoulders and keep my hips neutral, I create a position that's going to translate to football. So we do our basic offset, turn and throw. Then, where we're straight ahead, and then we offset to the left, turn and throw, offset to the right, turn and throw. We do a lot of back pedal shuffle, quick flip movements where they get the feet in the ground and they got to find the throw. And then as quick as possible, I want my athletes to then be interacting with another position group. Now, if I want to create stuff that helps pocket awareness and pocket movement, I think it's that's such a loaded question, because I find like people, they think that the movement or the lack of movement ability is what's creating the issue in the pocket. And that's just not the case, right? I mean, maybe it is with like super young quarterbacks, but learning to move with your back foot first is not an issue. That's not going to not get you sacked, right? Getting sacked or not being able to move in the pocket is because you haven't done it enough, or you have poor distraction control, meaning you like stuff around you freaks you out quicker, right? So it's the old saying, right? Like ladder drills or agility ladder. What's not agility, right? Agility is reaction to stimulus. So an agility ladder, ironically, just works on change of direction, right? And so the problem is that the missing piece, right? I can go work on an agility ladder every single day for the rest of my life, and I will not be any more agile. I might move a little bit better, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be able to get out of the way. So you have to create things that relate to the game, right? It's got to be the law of specificity, right? If you want something, you want to get better at something, do that something. So there's got to be some randomness. There's got to be some, I think having people do stuff, create those positions, rush angles, whatever the case is. those are the types of things. And those are simple to do. I feel like you got 3 quarterbacks, 1 catches, 1 rushes, 1 throws, right?
Right.
They don't know where it's coming from.
Yep.
So anytime you can create those scenarios, I think it's great. That's how, and you can teach movement from that way better than, hey, we're going to learn to move through these bags, because the bags don't move. They're there. You can hack the drill very, very quickly when your quarterback knows what they have to do, meaning they're going to get really good at this drill, which is not going to translate to football. The problem is people get wrapped up, well, University of whatever did this drill and they won a national championship and their quarterback threw for 4,000 yards. Great. Well, Jimmy over there never ever did that drill and he threw for 5,000 yards. I mean, so, one of the quarterbacks with, not the most elite feat I've ever seen, Anthony Gordon, who played at Washington State, he threw for like 6,000 yards in a season. And that guy would look terrible running through a ladder. But the dude's a freaking baller and knows how to move in the pocket, right? So there's this. If it lacks context to the game, I don't know why we continue to do stuff like that. But that's competitive advantage, I guess, if you figure that out, because you don't have to waste as much time on it. So,
right, and that's no, you're good. That was a really good answer. I've always struggled with, like, usually you get 10, 15 minutes of indie time.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of it to me is, if I'm not either grouped with another position that I'm going to be playing with in a game, or if I'm not going to simulate a rush, like, it doesn't really relate. It doesn't matter to me. So I've always struggled with that question and being able to come up with drills.
Full speed movements,
right,
where you can settle, create stability. Anything where you have to turn and flip, I think, are fantastic. I just would not overcomplicate it. Your warm up should be representative of the throw. Like, make your warm up match the throw in terms of building patterns. Yeah, do that part then, and then everything else should be about stability and throwing in somewhat chaotic environments. And I think from that approach, we'll get a lot better.
Yeah, and then so we only got about 7 minutes, but one more question for you. So.
Sure.
This is more scheme related, and I know you've been more in the training world, but like where you're at, like day one install, what's the pass concept 3-step for you that, like, it's going to carry you weeks 1 through 10 this year?
Sure.
How do you coach the progression, maybe, or how your kids are going to read it?
Yeah. So when you say like intermediate game or quick game?
Let's go intermediate.
3-step.
Intermediate. Let's go intermediate, 3-5-step.
That's a great question, and I'm a rookie in this world, because I've been around a lot of football. I've been exposed to a lot of great minds, from guys that are now head coaches in the NFL, to other guys that are legendary high school coaches, and some really kick-ass youth football coaches. But I think the concept that I've liked the most, and I think there's some version of it on every team, and if there's not, you should have it. I think the simplicity of the Leach Y cross.
I was going to say the same exact thing. I'm so glad you said that.
No, it's such a good play. I think it hits. It's got details from every little thing that I think you can. It's got aspects that work for everyone in every game. It's a good play off of other plays, right? So you've got kind of like. So as I understand it from Leach's standpoint, it's only run to the left. They only run it to the left, and it doesn't matter where you're at on the field. Now, they're on college hashes, so I think that does make a little bit of a difference.
It does.
High school hashes are stupid. I just wish that rule would change. Can't we just all be at college hash? Texas figured it out, but we didn't. We just run it to the field, or we'll change the formation and maybe run it the other direction.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, the good thing about it, right? You've got your MOR, you've got your bench route, you've got your cross, and then you curl on the backside with swing, right? And we played around with the 5-yard out versus like the 10-yard out. But the cool thing about teams that play a lot of like 2-read or palms coverage, right? If you have a 5-yard out, it doesn't, that corner, you get a situation, where they can read it quickly. So the 10-yard out, the advantage of that, it looks like 4 verts initially, right? And so if you run 4 verts, you see 2 vertical releases from 1 and 2,
right?
But then that guy's on the out. And I think for the quarterback, it makes it a little easier to see, pre-snap, hey, there's a lot of space in the middle right now. I'm still gonna, but and from Leach's way, just only do the progression the way you do the progression, right? It's MOR, bench, cross, curl, swing. It doesn't change. You read every single one of them. The guys that have run it the best have told me, generally speaking, that the MOR and the bench route are kind of one quicker read. We really just want to get to the cross,
right.
And I think once you rep the cross and you guys feel how to run the good cross route, it's a really, really good concept that I like. I think it's pretty universal. You can play with different formations. You can add play action. You can change the front side of it to, some guys run like maybe a quick screen with a slot fade or something. There's all kinds of little, I think Lincoln Riley does a fantastic job with what the variations he's got off of it. So I think cross is really, really good. And I think if you have some version of 4 verts to go along with that, I think it makes plays make plays better, right?
Right.
One of the best quick game concepts that we used last year, I got from my buddy who's the OC at South Dakota State. 3x1 stick, MOR, out, stick, backside, the flat route from the back, but we'd actually tag them with like a Texas route.
Yeah.
And then I think we had a condensed split, either a corner or slot fade from the number one on the into the boundary side. And what the problem with stick with 3x1 was if that mic plusses over and covers the stick, a lot of the times that you'll work the progression, and if you have that little Texas route on the backside coming open, it's really easy to go stick.
Wow, that's good.
See the mic. Oh, it's fantastic.
That's really, really good.
Such a good one. Great. So I like to the point where like we only ran 3x1 stick that way because it was so good.
God, really
but
good.
I really love that one. You got to set it up with the flat a couple times, but then just have the back on the Texas on the backside. Stick to Texas.
Or play the
nasty because that mic's over there. He pluses to the stick route.
Yep.
Freaking crush guys on that. So.
Well, I'm glad you said Y cross though. That's been my favorite route concept. I don't know how long, but I just like how you can, like you said, you can play different games on the front side of it. You can have all different variations of smash routes, really, and you can formation it to death. Like Ryan Day, I cover Ohio State here in Columbus.
Okay,
Texas knows, and that dude runs it a ton of different ways.
Yeah,
I mean, all different personnel sets, out of play action, just everything. It's so multiple.
And I give a good quick plug. I'm a huge fan of like Dub Maddox and R4.
Yep, same here.
So I think there's some application there for guys that are looking to, from just like if you want to dig deeper into understanding hips and leverage, that's been super helpful in my world. And I'm lucky to know him as a friend. Get the inside scoop on that. But that guy's crushing it. So regardless of the concepts, so taking that process to help coach quarterbacks.
Oh yeah,
it's been really super helpful for me. I'm bang. I got my little R4 clock out there. I'm like, you're late, dude. You're late.
Right.
So but that's been really helpful too. There, I think I can't recommend that enough. I don't get any money from Dub, so that's a genuine plug. I think the guy's a rock star.
Yeah, I agree. I think his stuff is very applicable and it helps high school QBs. But dude, I really appreciate you hopping on with me. This is going to be gold. A lot of people are going to love this stuff. I will.
Awesome stuff, man.
I'll put it on YouTube here probably in the next hour. But man, I really, really appreciate it. It's really nice,
brother.
Really good dude, man.
Of course, man. Thanks for hitting me up. I appreciate it. I love doing these things. It was fun. I was like, I haven't said anything in a while, so maybe I can piss some people off.
There we go.
But, all right, man. Cool, man. We'll talk
take
to
it
you.
easy, man.
Appreciate you. All right.